Hi, everyone in the room and everyone out there on Zoom. We've got a hybrid program going on today. So we've got a nice group of maybe 75 people here in the room and another up to about 50 online. So it's a nice turnout. Thank you all for coming tonight. We are joining you here from the Bell Museum, and I want to thank you for coming out. It's nice to be back to in-person programs. I am Jenny Stamp. I'm the Interim Director of Public Engagement and Science Learning here at the Bell, and I'm really happy to be hosting Travis Novitsky here tonight. He is one of the authors of Spirits Dancing, a new book from the Minnesota Historical Society Press, along with his co-author, Annette Lee. Before we get started, I want to begin by acknowledging that, like the rest of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, the Bell Museum sits on the traditional and treaty lands of the Dakota people. This land from which I join you tonight, Zoom audience, and on which we are gathered tonight, was reserved to the Dakota in the 1851 Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, and it remains sacred to them today. I want to also recognize the Anishinaabe or Ojibwe people, keepers of lands to the north, lands that were also taken despite treaties reserving them to the Ojibwe people. At the Bell Museum, we acknowledge this history of dispossession and our place in it as a unit of the University of Minnesota. We understand that Indigenous knowledge systems are crucial ways of knowing this place, now called Minnesota. Those systems are embedded in Indigenous languages, communities, and cultural practices. At the Bell, we honor Indigenous knowledge keepers and the frameworks that support them, and we're committed to building respectful relations in projects that serve Indigenous people and their communities. One of the ways we do that is that we extend complimentary admission to our galleries and our planetarium shows to all Indigenous people. I want to be sure that you all know this and that you on Zoom are aware of that. And we hope that you'll make use of this policy and come visit us at the Bell another time. And now it's my honor to introduce our speaker tonight, Travis Novitsky. Travis is a lifelong resident of the North Shore of Lake Superior. He is a nature and wildlife photographer, best known for images that portray the wonders of the night sky, which you know, and that's why you're here tonight. His work is prominently featured in the documentary Northern Nights, Starry Skies, a film that he narrated and co-produced with partners PBS North and Hamline University's Center for Global Environmental Education. Travis is a member of the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, and he is proud of his mixed Ojibwe, French, Swedish, Russian, and Polish ancestry. And before I turn it over to Travis, I just have a couple of notes for the audience. We'll have time for questions after Travis's presentation. For those of you on Zoom, you can post your questions and comments to the Q&A in Zoom, and we'll ask your question live when we have a chance. We have captioning turned on. Do we have captioning turned on? I'll check that when I am not at this computer. If you are at home and do not want to be seeing that, you can turn it off with the CC button. And we will be making a recording of this discussion available on our website as soon as we're able to. So if you're registered for this program, you'll get a link about that when it's posted. Travis, it's your turn. Thank you so much for being here.
Bonjour, Travis Indigenous Kaz, Makwa and Dudam, Gitchione Gaming and Dunjaba. Hi everyone, my name is Travis. I am Bear Clan and I am from Grand Portage. A proud citizen and lifelong resident of the Grand Portage Anishinaabe Nation at the northeast tip of Minnesota. I am primarily a self-taught photographer, and I've been photographing my native homelands of the Lake Superior region for over 25 years. So Miigwech, thank you for being here tonight, and thank you to all the folks at the Bell Museum and Minnesota Historical Society Press for supporting my work and for publishing this beautiful new book called Spirits Dancing. And I've had, the book, of course, has been a lot of work. It's been a lot of fun to put together too. I've also had another big project in the last couple of years, and that is the documentary called Northern Nights, Starry Skies, which was released in November of last year. And that's a film that I also narrated and co-produced with PBS North out of Duluth. and Hamlin University Center for Global Environmental Education. So if you haven't seen the film yet, I urge you to check it out. You can find it by searching Northern Nights, Starry Skies on YouTube. And the documentary and this book really complement each other nicely. And so the image you see here is the cover of what I hope readers will find to be a mesmerizing new book, of course, called Spirits Dancing. It's a collaborative effort with Annette Lee. Annette is an award-winning visual artist, science communicator, and civic engagement leader who leads transformation work with Indigenous communities worldwide. She's been working at the intersection of science, art, and culture for a lifetime and continues this work as the executive director of Native Skywatchers and as a self-employed visual artist. It was really a huge honor working with Annette, and throughout the process of the book coming to fruition, I really learned a lot from her. And that's something that I'm eternally grateful for. I owe some immense thanks to Annette for dedicating her time and knowledge in crafting the text for the book. And in the book, Annette and I both write of the wonders of star bathing, sitting quietly under the stars, knowing that humans have always done this, knowing that we literally come from the stars. And now I'd like to share with you some images and words from the book. And then can we go a little darker, or is this, that's good? I don't want to shut it completely off. Okay. Yeah, okay. Let's see here, how I advance. Go to my next slide, which is not working. There we go. Okay. What's that? What does everybody think? You want to go darker? All right. They do tend to look better the darker it is. Try to make us feel like we're actually out there at night. That's nice, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. I think we're doing good here. We got good light still. If anybody, what's that? Yeah. Okay. So few experiences bring us such feelings of joy, curiosity, and excitement as gazing upward on a dark night sky. Instinctively, we seem to know that the same sky has shone down on us, on all humanity, for all time. The sky defines our humanness and connects us through the millennia to people past, present, and future. We truly share one sky. The text from this book weaves together fascinating narratives from three worldviews: scientific, cultural, and personal, in our human relationship to the night sky, with special attention to the aurora borealis, or northern lights. Embedded throughout the book is the foundational teaching of two-eyed seeing. As discussed by Mi'kmaq elders Merdana and Albert Marshall, two-eyed seeing is learning to see from one eye with the strengths of the indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledges and ways of knowing, and to use both of these eyes for the benefit of all. We are physically connected to the cosmos by nucleosynthesis. All life, all atoms were made either from stars living and dying or from the Big Bang. But the local to global to cosmic recycling does not stop there. Along with the original reservoir of our atomic makeup, we experience a physical exchange with the cosmos every day: cosmic dust. The solar system was formed over 4.6 billion years ago, but leftover dust still hangs about and falls on Earth. This constant rain of cosmic dust adds up to somewhere between 13,000 and 40,000 metric tons of material each year, depending on how much is lost as it burns up in Earth's atmosphere. So when it comes to being outside, at the atomic level at least, it's raining stardust every night and every day, even when it's cloudy. Understanding something about the aurora, something about the fragility and the power of the night sky, can deepen our appreciation and our amazement. With two-eyed seeing, then, we offer these images of the aurora and the night sky, along with the stories told by Western science, some of the stories and teachings told by several indigenous peoples, and the stories told by the book's authors. We hope they inspire you to join us as witnesses and protectors. Through centuries of theorizing, observation, measurement, and experimentation, Western scientists have developed an understanding of the cause of the northern lights. The aurora occurs when charged particles from the sun arrive at Earth. Most of the particles are deflected by Earth's magnetic field, but some get through. These newly arrived electrons are not able to travel in a straight line down to the surface of the Earth. Instead, they must follow a circling spiral path along the magnetic field lines, which are clustered toward Earth's north and south poles. Eventually, they collide with the gas particles of our upper atmosphere. Such high energy collisions cause the electrons in the atmospheric oxygen and nitrogen to become excited or ionized, and eventually the energy is released in the form of light. Some of the light from this incredible micro-macro solar terrestrial exchange is at the right wavelength that our human eyes can detect it, and we see the beautiful aurora. The light from the sun, traveling at 183,000 miles per second, takes 8.3 minutes to make the 93 million mile journey to Earth. At any given time, Earth is also connected to the sun by a steady stream of charged particles or plasma. The sun's magnetic field is constantly carrying the stream of plasma from the outer atmosphere of the sun into the solar system at about 1 million miles per hour. And roughly every 11 years, as part of the solar cycle, the activity on the sun increases to solar maximum. The cycle is correlated with the number of dark spots on the sun, areas of dense magnetic activity that result in a strong magnetic field pointed outward from the sun's surface. In periods of solar minimum, it's uncommon to see sunspots, or there are just a few small spots that don't last long. However, in periods of solar maximum, there are many spots, sometimes up to 100, and some are large, up to 30,000 miles across and lasting for several weeks. And although the exact details of this sun-Earth aurora relationship are still an active area of research, one pattern has emerged. A large complex of sunspots is sometimes followed by a coronal mass ejection. In a CME, Earth receives not only the solar wind and solar flares, but also, depending on the relative angle, a giant cloud of energetic gas particles that triggers the excitation of molecules in Earth's magnetic field, a geomagnetic storm, and the aurora. Today, there are still a lot of unanswered questions about this solar terrestrial relationship, but the basic idea is that an active sun means more sunspots, more CMEs, and more intense aurora on Earth. And we are right now, I would say, in solar maximum. Like, it's probably going to last maybe a year or two more, if not longer. But we had a couple of really good events this year, one in March, one in April. And just recently, we had a really favorable forecast for strong northern lights, but at least up in the Arrowhead region, it was totally cloudy. And I did see some photos from like Mora, Minnesota. So presumably down here around the cities, you could have seen them on those nights. Just out of curiosity, did anybody see them like in the last couple of weeks? A few, cool. So you were the lucky ones. Us up north didn't get to see it. Auroras and their associated colors are linked to energy and altitude. Green, which is the most common auroral emission, is produced by oxygen atoms, and it occurs at altitudes of about 59 miles above Earth's surface and higher. Purple, caused by molecular nitrogen, most often occurs at the bottom edge of this green line. And reds occur at higher altitudes of 120 miles or more and are also caused by the oxygen atom. And sometimes, in my experience, very rarely, you can see a deep blue color at the top of auroral rays and curtains. And Dirk Lummersheim, a physicist at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, explains how this blue color occurs. The auroral electrons not only produce light-emitting excited atoms and molecules, but they also ionize molecules. These ions can then be pulled upward by electric fields in the aurora and reach altitudes high enough that they will be exposed to sunlight. The sunlight then scatters off these ions, and there exists a blue emission of the molecular nitrogen ion that is particularly strong in scattering sunlight, which is why we sometimes see a blue upper end of the aurora curtains. And I got to step out of the text for a minute here from the book and tell a story about this photo, because there was a friend, another photographer friend, who was out shooting with me this night. And this is just about a half mile from where I live. And we had walked down there to photograph the Milky Way that night. And those of you that know about the Milky Way, in the summer, the best, brightest part of the galactic core is visible to the south, which of course is not usually where we see northern lights. There, usually to the north. But we went down there that night and there were no northern lights going on when we got there. And so we set up on the shoreline and we're looking to the south and at our backs to the north, and we're shooting for quite a while. And this buddy of mine, we were maybe 50 feet apart on the shoreline. And I don't even think I was taking pictures. I think I was just sitting there kind of watching the Milky Way, and he's over there shooting. And then all of a sudden he goes, "Travis, can you come look at my pictures? Like there's something weird going on." And so I walked over and he said, "Yeah, the rocks look really weird in the foreground. They like look green." So I went over and I looked, "Well, show me," and he pulls up a picture on the back of his camera screen, and I looked and I'm like, "Yeah, that's weird. Like it's almost like whoa, like the northern lights are like going crazy behind us." And we didn't even know it. Usually I'll notice that, right? Like when this kind of activity erupts, you'll notice the ground light up if you're paying attention. Of course, we were looking up at the stars, I wasn't paying attention to the ground. But yeah, that was kind of funny. And so from the Western science perspective, it was a long held belief that the only sounds accompanying the aurora were, in a person's imagination. Science is rooted in measurement, and no one had recorded or measured sounds. And this remained a mystery to Western science for nearly a century before acoustics professor Unto Laine from Finland proved the existence of aurora sounds. Laine began the Auroral Acoustics Project in the year 2000, but it wasn't until a geomagnetic storm on March 7th, 2012, in the open fields of Finland that he was able to document nearly 90 sounds. And his work clearly showed a correlation between the magnetic field activity and the audio events. He captured short claps, crackling, and loud bursts. In 2016, he presented a possible mechanism for the sounds. Under certain circumstances, our troposphere, where humans live, is characterized by a region of relatively cold air that's trapped below a region of very warm air. And the boundary between these two regions is called an inversion layer. And during a geomagnetic storm, the whole system acts like a capacitor, accumulating a positive charge on top and a negative charge on the bottom. During a discharge of the energy, crackling or slapping sounds are produced. And in 2021, Liney noted, there is no doubt that the so-called aurora sounds have been recorded many times now, and that they are made by electric discharging processes in the temperature inversion layer. The solar wind variations are behind both phenomena, visual and auditory. And I think you can go on YouTube and type in aurora sounds, and you'll actually find some of those recordings. Indigenous nations have studied the sky for millennia, and their cosmologies are vast and deep. Teachings about the aurora are often intertwined with teachings about the Milky Way and the night sky. Some of this knowledge is protected, most of it has not been written down, and much has been lost due to colonization. The connection between the aurora and the dancing spirit lights comes from the Ojibwe phrase, Jibayag Nima Itawag, which refers to the northern lights or aurora borealis. Jibayag translates as ghosts or spirits, and Nima Itawag translates as they dance. Another Ojibwe word for the northern lights is wawate. There is a display of northern lights. And I recently learned from one of our language instructors in Grand Portage, another word that could be used, wasanude. And I'm not a language expert, so I can't remember the original, like it's from two different words, where the first part, the wasa part, comes from a word that refers to lightning or flashing lights. And nude comes from nuden, which means wind. And so that word kind of means like there's a flashing light wind. And I really like that term because it's very descriptive of what is actually happening. You know, it's the solar wind producing these lights, and they're flickering and flashing. So I thought that's a pretty cool term. But this concept relates to the Ojibwe teaching about the Milky Way, or Jibai Zibi, the river of souls. Ojibwe scholar and elder Carl Gaboy explains, when the soul departs, it travels a path to the west. After other trials, the soul comes to a great shining river, one whose reflection can be seen in the night sky, the Milky Way. The Ojibwe understanding of the Milky Way relates to the spirit returning to the stars along the Jibai Zibi. The soul gets in a waiting canoe and paddles the river to the great beyond, greets all of the friends and relatives, and when we look up at the night sky and see the northern lights, it is our relatives dancing. So clearly in the indigenous perception of both the Jibai Zibi and the Jibayag Nimi Idawag, the core understanding is not what can be recorded, but that which is fundamental to human nature, the spiritual journey. Here we see the relationship-based indigenous connection to the aurora and the Milky Way. The night sky is not solely an abstract collection of facts that exists externally to be measured, but rather like a close relative who exists nearby and whose influence is vast. The very name of the state of Minnesota has been appropriated from the Dakota phrase Minnesota Makoche, which translates as the land where the waters reflect the skies or heavens. This idea of reflection and connection to the night sky is a fundamental theme of Dakota cosmology. The Dakota word for this twin relationship or pairing of earth and sky is kapemini. And this single word contains an entire cosmological philosophy. Its usual translation, as it is above, it is below, oversimplifies but speaks directly to this critical indigenous-based worldview of a mirrored relationship between earth and sky. The 7 council fires, called the Sioux Nation, are the people who speak the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota dialects. The 7 groups in the nation are mirrored by the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. And apologies if there are any Dakota folks in the room because I don't know the language very well, but on the pronunciation here, one Dakota translation of Northern Lights is Wanagi Thawachipi, or spirits dancing. This perspective relates to the fundamental philosophy of origin. We come from the stars. Lakota spiritual leader Arvo Lookinghorse, in addressing Native Skywatchers in 2021, explained, "We came here as a spirit from Star Nation, and when we get done, we go back. The star knowledge is like a mirror. The stars up there, and we have the stars down here. The connecting bridge between here and the spirit world is the road of the spirits, or the Milky Way." Innu, also known as Cree, elder and science communicator Wilfred Buck has written and spoken extensively about the Milky Way and an ancient being of energy or spirit called Kokomanasis, or grandmother spider, who resides at the river of spirits, the Milky Way. Kokomanasis is a doorkeeper between the worlds, and Pekona-Kisik, or hole in the sky, also called the Pleiades, is the place of origin for Innu people. It all started when Achiko Siskiyou, Star Woman, wanted to come to Earth. She made an agreement with Grandmother Spider. Star Woman would transform from a being of energy to a physical form, make a life on Earth for a time, and then leave it behind when it was time to return to the star world. Grandmother Spider cast a single strand of web for Star Woman's entry through the hole in the sky. Star Woman brought a gift of the star blanket as a reminder of her origin. As Buck explains, all the people entered Earth through this umbilical cord, and we are the star children. Once again, the Innu relationship to the sky is not solely a linear list of facts or quantification of physical behavior. While a great deal of observation and pattern finding is important, the overriding ideology is the lived, interconnected, everyday practice of a participatory relationship with sky and earth that has meaning and value in the larger scheme of human existence and wellness. The Dene people, who live in the northwest reaches of Turtle Island, hold a vast depth of knowledge and practice regarding the relationship to the Northern Lights. There are at least 28 different Dene linguistic and cultural groups, spanning the area from Alaska to Hudson Bay, Canada. Chris Cannon, assistant professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Alaska's Center for Cross-Cultural Studies, has compiled a table with 42 different Dene names for the Northern Lights. Several key Dene concepts about the Northern Lights relate to caribou, sounds, smells, and dancing spirits. Like the Ojibwe and Dakota nations, the Dene also understand and know the Northern Lights as ancestors who have passed on. And the caribou on the ground are related to the Northern Lights in the sky. This pairing is seen on several levels. First, rubbing the fur of a reindeer creates sparks. An electrostatic charge is generated when caribou brush against each other as herds move in the dry cold of northern Canada. The Dene understand that where the Northern Lights are seen in the sky, there is a large herd of caribou moving below. But even more, they teach that when people make certain sounds, the northern lights, as if it is a wild animal, will either be curious and come closer or be scared and go away. The familiar sounds that draw in the lights are whistling and a kind of clicking or flicking of the fingernails to mimic the clicking of caribou hooves. The aurora also make a sound like that of a caribou herd moving together. Yellowknive's Dene elder, Madeline Bulio, explained, "It's just like it, the northern lights, roams around looking for noise. As soon as it hears something, it goes in that direction and it hovers around like it's investigating." Clapping is one sound that will deter the northern lights from coming down too close. Yellowknive's Dene elder, Fred Sangris, mentions all of these qualities. The northern lights too, they play a big part of our life here. I used to experience them a lot here in my younger days when I traveled north. And because the dogs are huffing and puffing and the tracks are making a lot of noise, northern lights, sometimes they come right down to you. And the whole forest and the whole area will be just bright, especially further north, close to the tundra. And you can almost smell it, you know? It has that odor, that smell. And that's what we use. And people whistle. I have people, young people traveling with me whistling, you know, trying to make that come down. I don't like it. I tell them not to whistle. So what we do, we clap our hands. Now they're going back up again. So we use the whistle and the clapping, but it's attracted by something from the sled dogs or by noise. Especially if there's thousands of caribou in that forest on the hill, there'll be northern lights just bright right above them. So when we go hunting in the olden days, we watch for northern lights where it's brightest on the hill or in that country. Then we know there's thousands of caribou in there because all that noise and movement kind of attracts the lights right to it. All the animals are together. And sometimes if you pay attention to the caribou, I can tell you that there's some kind of light on caribou too from the hair at night. It's amazing, but not a lot of biologists and not a lot of people see that. You have to be right there with the herds in the forest and you'll see it too, especially when they're all together moving. So clearly the Northern Dene are experts when it comes to lived knowledge, indigenous knowledge of the Aurora Borealis. Most people in the United States today are lucky if they live in a place where the sky is dark enough to actually see the Milky Way. And I think that that figure is something, at least for the US, like 80% of the people in the US live in an area where they will never see the Milky Way. And so we all share a responsibility for ensuring the preservation of night sky areas clear of artificial lights. Light pollution is here to stay, but we can be smarter about how we interact with natural resources and how our actions affect the natural ecosystem. This mindful responsibility not only preserves our ability to view stars and celestial phenomena, it also is an important component of health for humans and other organisms in the ecosystem. In other words, the dark night sky is part of our human legacy. The very rhythm of life depends on this day-night cycle. And for millennia, humans have gazed at the night sky in awe and wonder. Western science provides fascinating insights into the physics of what we witness. Indigenous knowledge asserts powerful human connections to the stars and the northern lights. And our own quiet observation strengthens and deepens our relationship to the sky. And with careful attention, we can feel our connection to generations past who have shared these emotions and curiosity. And we can recognize our own connection to future generations and our responsibility for preserving this experience for them. And that's my condensed version of the book. So, Miigwech, thank you. Yay.
Thank you, Travis, and thank you for that call to action. We're going to take just 1 second to get some lights up, get some microphones out, and we'll take your questions.
So somebody asked me about Comet Neowise. Is this the picture you were thinking of? Yeah,
That's the one.
my brain went right to that one when you mentioned that. Yeah.
I love that.
So there's, interesting things going on here too. Besides that, of course, we have a great view of the Big Dipper, which, Ojibwe belief is a fissure. And then up over on the right, we've got, I can't see it from here. Cassiopeia, I think, up there on the top right, and then below that, Perseid meteor kind of shooting through the frame, so. Pretty lucky shot.
How many hours?
Oh, they want to bring a mic around to you. Yeah,
Okay, how many hours would you say you've spent outdoors? Ballpark, I mean, or is it how many months and how many days? I mean, obviously there's certain times of the year.
yeah. It's hard to put a number on it, but, I will say that I spend less time outdoors now than I used to. In pursuit of this kind of stuff. Mainly the aurora, less time pursuing that because 15, 20 years ago, the forecasting wasn't that great. And so I would go out most nights and just spend half the night or more out there. And, the idea was the more time I spend out here, the more times I'll see northern lights. And that was true, but there were an awful lot of times where I didn't see them. And, I work a regular job in addition to doing this, so I had to kind of balance sleep requirements with satisfying photography dreams and, so yeah, I used to spend a lot of hours out. I mean, I'd go out maybe 3 or 4 nights a week and spend half the night or more out there, just hoping for the best and in terms of aurora events, but I like to tell people, don't get too hung up on seeing the aurora because a lot of times you're not going to, but you're going to see a lot of other cool stuff. And this is a good example, where you're not always going to have a comet. That's rare, but you'll see cool things no matter what. And nowadays with forecasting being so much better, I can, spaceweather.com is the #1 website that I use to help predict, what's going to be a higher probability night. So then, and sometimes it's 3 or 4 days ahead of time where they predict a storm. And then I can kind of plan, okay, in the next 2 or 3 nights, then I'm going to get extra sleep. And on that 4th night, I'm going to be out all night just in case. And so I go out less, but I am more productive in terms of the shots I get. Yeah.
Do you say what that one bright spot is on the picture there, not the comet, but the other one?
The clouds?
The flash of light kind of in the middle?
Oh, I'd have to look back. Could be a planet. You're talking about that light?
No, the flash of light above the tree line. Going off.
Oh, this.
No, that's, yeah. She means, I think, yes,
The clouds, the lit up clouds.
I think, yeah. No, she means, I think she means way over to the right.
Would you mind going up and pointing at it?
Over there, this one right here. That's the.
Yeah, that's the
Oh,
comet.
that's the.
Yep. And that's a meteor. Perseid meteor, yep. Yep. So the comet is visible there all night. You know, it just kind of hangs there and it moves along with everything else in the sky. Well, we're moving too, we're spinning, but the meteors, that was luck because those they shoot right through and you're lucky if you catch one, but the comet just kind of stays there. It was visible. I don't remember, was it at least a month or something like that? That it was visible to us? Yeah, but there is over on the right, that's what I thought you were talking about. The clouds are kind of lit up. That's light pollution coming from Thunder Bay, Ontario, which is like 50 miles away from that spot. So really, city lights do have a huge impact. You got one in the back there.
I'll go with this one from Zoom if you don't
Okay.
mind first. We have a lot of people saying miigwech. And also a question, what is the oddest thing you have seen while watching the night sky?
Oh. Oh. Never been asked that. I don't know that I'd say that's the oddest. Somebody asked if it was the moose story. And I have a number of those, but there was this one time where I was standing on this short, like 20-foot long, very poorly maintained dock on an inland lake, and I had a moose. There were no northern lights. It was a Milky Way night, so it was very dark. And there was a cow moose that walked along the shore behind me. Like, so I was standing out on this dock and I'm like, there's nowhere I can go if that cow decided to charge me, but I just stayed quiet as I could, and she kind of minded her own business and walked back into the woods. And other times I've startled, there was one time 2 summers ago, I think, where I was on the Ontario side of the Pigeon River up in northern Minnesota, or across from northern Minnesota, and I had driven up to this logging cut because logging cuts make great places for northern lights and Milky Way viewing, nice and open with accent trees, you know, against the sky. But the mosquitoes were horrible. And so there was a chance for northern lights that night. That's why I had gone there. But the mosquitoes were so bad, I can't stand outside, you know, they're just too awful. And so I set up my camera to shoot a time lapse, got back in my car, let the camera go for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that. And I'm sitting there like, okay, the timer went off. I gotta go back out and get swarmed again by these bugs. And as soon as I opened up the door, there was a large animal close by, and I was on a dirt road, so I heard it kind of skid as it tried to run on the dirt, you know, like that, and it was huffing. And so that was to my left. Behind me, I also heard other animals that were, you know, running into the brush behind me. I'm like, oh my God, what is this, you know? And so there were big pine trees behind me. And first thing I did was jump back in the car. I waited a couple minutes and then like, okay, I gotta go outside and get my camera. So I jumped back out and got my camera. And when I got back in the Jeep, I've got these like pod lights that help shine upwards and outwards a little bit. So I turned those on, turned the Jeep around, and I was shining up at these pine trees. And here were, so if this is the pine tree, there were 3 little bear cubs. There was one peeking around here, and peeking around there. They were staggered up the trunk of that tree. And what I'd heard was, one of the noises I'd heard was their claws, you know, kind of going up the tree like that. And I don't know where mom was at that point, and I wasn't gonna stick around to find out, so I drove about 10 miles away to another spot and shot the rest of the night. So I guess it's not really odd, but yeah. This is a really long answer, but one more story, and this probably qualifies as odd, where it was at this lake, actually. This is in Grand Portage State Forest. And there are state forest campsites on, this photo was taken right from the boat landing, and on either side of the boat landing a little ways down the shore, there's some rustic campsites. And of course, you know, when we go out to these places, we're often thinking, oh, like, at least me, I hope nobody else is there, you know, because I want to be there by myself. I want the quiet. I don't want interruption. And when I got there, got out of the car, immediately and there were incredible northern lights going on that night, but immediately I could hear voices off in the distance and sounded like a group of young men, maybe in their early 20s. And I think they were a little tuned up and maybe something else too, but they were sitting around a campfire, I would guess, and watching this Northern Lights display, and the conversation was just super entertaining because, you know, it was like, dude, how old do you think that tree is there? That one that's, I don't know, like 20 feet tall? Like, I bet you that tree is as old as we are, maybe more. And I was just like, well, so at first, you know, I was really annoyed, but as they kept talking, I was just trying not to laugh out loud because I don't think they knew I was there, but and then I can't remember, some of the other comments was like, I bet that tree is just as important to the universe as we are, maybe more. Like, so interesting, very, very deep thoughts, you know. That's probably the oddest. So we can move on. And I keep saying, one day, one of these guys is gonna be like sitting out there, and if it's happened, they haven't identified themselves yet. Yeah, we got one over.
Would you? Are we good now? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Would you, regrets for being here, Travis? Would you mind, just repeating that word you shared with us in the Anishinaabe that you said a speaker from your reservation shared? Wasa
Oh, Wasa Nude.
New Day. Okay.
Yeah. Technicalities, not from my reservation, but he's just an incredible resource. I mean, I love talking to him because he not only tells you the word, but he explains the structure of it and the root words that word is made up of and what they mean. And it's just really cool that he's so willing to share. But Wasa Nude,
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Miigwech. Oh, went right in front here.
I got a
Sorry, I'm
question.
pointing.
I had a question here.
Is this on?
Oh, we
Okay,
got two.
great. Hi.
We'll go up front and then you.
Who?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, which thank you for your beautiful, beautiful photographs and sharing your stories. About a year ago, up in the end of November, I was up at Tribal State Relations Training up at Boys Fort.
Okay.
I work in the area of climate resilience and adaptation, and of course, the tribes have been way ahead of us for decades, if not centuries. So one of the things that they shared was the release of a gorgeous map called the Legends Map,
Yeah.
where they had spent years identifying the original indigenous names of many of the rivers and lakes in northern Minnesota. And the Legends Map was just absolutely beautiful. It was only $100, and then they are making available maps for $20. I was wondering, have you seen this map, and are you looking forward to maybe looking at it and making it a part of your work?
I've seen it online just as a, you know, picture on the screen. I haven't seen it in person, as I would imagine there's large probably. But I have not seen the actual hard copy, but I've heard about it. I'm aware of it and anxious to see it. And we do have similar efforts going on up in Grand Portage too, with our community's language advisory board, working with MnDOT, Department of Transportation, to get rivers along the North Shore, along Highway 61 with bilingual signage, English and Ojibwe. So maybe someday you'll see a map from Grand Portage too. Or the North Shore in general. Yeah. And we had a guy in the gray sweater over here.
Yeah, so it seems like the sky is like a really big, like photography is a great mediator between your relationship with yourself and the sky. Are there things that you have discovered because of that mediation between photography and the sky, or are there things that has like disrupted your appreciation with the sky using photography? Like for instance, like you're not able to be in the moment of the sky, or just any avenue with that?
I have noticed that, and in my non-book reading presentations, I talk more about that where, being under the night sky is the number one thing that kind of keeps me grounded and centered. It's the best way for me to kind of, after a busy day at work, just go out and kind of decompress and reconnect. And yeah, there are times where usually during Aurora events, because you've got all this activity going on where I find myself, oh, I gotta take a picture that way, I gotta take one that way. I get caught up in it, and it's hard not to do. It's hard to, when that activity is going on, to just kind of sit back and enjoy it. So I do run into that. But I'll share another hopefully short story where, from my other presentations, I mentioned this, how I used to kind of busy myself with capturing as many images as possible and then running home and like getting them in, putting them in Lightroom, editing them, getting a social media post out so everybody can see and, kind of want to be admittedly like one of the first people to get stuff online from this Aurora event for folks to see. And I noticed that the more I did that, the less I was getting out of it for myself. And so one day I was actually on a trip out west in the desert, and I was driving around listening to the TED radio hour, and there was a TED talk by actor Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And his talk was about getting attention versus paying attention. And in that talk, which is pretty brief, 15 minutes, very well worth your time to go watch that. But the key takeaway quote that resonated with me was, he said, I can't remember it now offhand, but I do have it saved on my phone. Just bear with me a second. If your creativity is driven by a desire to get attention, then you're never going to be creatively fulfilled. And so when I heard that, like, that made me go home and really kind of sit and think. And the next time I went out and subsequent times after that, I started to try to just pay attention more. And, maybe when I get somewhere, not dive right into my camera bag and set up and start taking pictures, but sit there for a bit, see what's going on around me, take in the environment and all that's happening. And I've noticed it makes a big difference. I come away more fulfilled from these experiences now. And I still do sometimes run home and try to post something right away, but most often I don't. Sometimes I'll wait a month or more before I share images. Sometimes I don't share them at all. Maybe they don't end up on social media and they end up in a book instead 5 years later. So, but that's a great question. Thank you for that one. Hopefully that answered it. Got a couple hands up.
Two very quick questions. One, do you ever shoot with just a cell phone instead of, I see you've got several 35 millimeters and such, but and then the other question, during the most recent show that was even as far south as St. Louis, a lot of the people that were taking the pictures were saying, all I saw were white, but my camera got the colors. Can you explain that?
Sure. So I do have, you know, like not the latest iPhone, but a fairly capable iPhone. But still, you can't really get stuff like this with it. So I would say sadly, notice that my phone replaces my good camera a lot on like daytime hikes and things, because it's just a lot easier to carry. And just so simple to pull it out, take a picture and stick it back in your pocket. But at night, and I think that's why I like the nighttime so much too, is it forces me to, you know, keep using the big camera and the dials and all the settings and but the color question, that's true, you know, like most of what we see with our eyes is kind of a white or like an off gray color. And you know, camera sensors are so much more sensitive to a broader range of light and color than our eyes are. And the main thing though, I think, is when we're out there, we're looking at a sky like this. Our eyes see the light that's there and the color that's there for just an instant. And typically these are, you know, 20 to 30-second exposures. They're shot at a high ISO setting, so the light sensitivity of the sensor is boosted a lot, and with a really wide aperture setting on the lens. So all of those factors, you know, the camera exposure collects light over that period of time. And I think just last Friday when I spoke at the Dark Sky Festival in Grand Marais, I said, you know, if we could like open our eyes for 30 seconds and collect that light the same way a camera would, and then close our eyes and see a picture, we would see a lot more light and a lot more color than we see in that instant. I think there was somebody on the right over here. Okay, yeah.
So is that the witch's tree in your pictures? And if so, where are you located to get a shot like that?
Can't remember what I had in here. It is, yes, but that term I really don't like. And a lot of people who live in Grand Portage, you know, I grew up calling it the witch tree, among other names. You know, we call it the spirit tree, Manido Gijigans, which means spirit little cedar tree in Ojibwe. But the term witch tree, and I don't know how witch tree got turned into witch's tree so commonly. Because that kind of has a negative connotation probably more often than not. And I think calling it witch's tree kind of denotes a concept of ownership. And that's really not a good way to look at it. But the term witch tree came from, as I understand, from a non-native painter who painted a picture of the tree back in like 1950 or something. And he titled his painting The Witch Tree. And it just stuck and kind of became popular use. But I most often refer to it as the spirit tree in English. You know, like I said, Manido Gijigans means spirit little cedar tree. And that's, I guess, how what you would say is it's, if we're going to call it something, a formal name. But I live just a half mile from it, so I can go down there whenever I want. I'm a tribal member, so, you know, I've got access, and I try not, I used to take a lot of, or make a lot of photographs down there and share them, but I do less of that now because we're seeing so much use and so much, like, kind of, you know, recognize that I'm part of this problem of creating, you know, so much more awareness of it. And, you know, you can visit the tree if you get a tribal guide, but getting a tribal guide can be difficult sometimes depending on who's currently agreed to go do that. But you asked, where was I? What, could you elaborate on that? Yeah. Yeah, I grew up less than a mile from it, so I've been visiting it my whole life. And, you know. Mhm. Oh, I think
Why don't we?
one more and then
more,
one Zoom.
And the one from Zoom.
Okay.
Go ahead. That'd be good now.
I think it's working now.
Cleo, can you take it for her? Get it going.
Thank you for sharing these beautiful photographs with us. But I'm curious, have you ever tried a video?
I've tried. It doesn't work with the cameras that I have. I would need a camera that can capture or a sensor rather, that's capable of shooting at much higher ISOs than my camera is in order to get real-time video of it. So I've shot a lot of time lapse and then I typically, when I render that and share it on my website or whatever, I slow that down, but it's still a lot faster than what you see in real time. So until I invest another $8,000 in a camera that can do real-time video, which I hope to do someday, but have not yet captured any real-time video of it. And one Zoom question?
Yes, let's take the last question from Zoom. We have a couple of different people there asking about resources and ways to advocate for dark skies. And some of the people who are asking are living up north and worried about their dock lights and their
Yeah.
neighbors' dock lights. And then we also have folks in the cities interested in the question.
So I would say go on, used to be called the International Dark Sky Association. They are now called Dark Sky International. And I think, do you have a web browser? I think it's just darksky.org. That's the best resource and the best place to go for contacts, like no matter where you live, because they're international, right? They've got advocates and representatives all over the world. If you're up in Northeast Minnesota, Starry Skies North out of Duluth would be the local chapter of Dark Sky International. And I think there's one down here in the cities too, but I can't remember their chapter name. But you can find those local contacts from the Dark Sky International website,
It's dark sky.
darksky.org. Yep. So miigwech again, everybody. We'll be, I'll be out at the table to sign books.
That's right. Thank you, Travis, so much for being here. Thank you all for coming and thanks to the audience on Zoom.